Hey, welcome back, parents. Listen, if you've ever just found yourself thinking, like, you know what? My spouse and I have totally different upbringings, completely different temperaments and personalities. And like, I think this is going to just destroy our marriage. Like, I'm not sure how we're going to make this work while we're raising little humans. Well, I want you to tune in for the duration of this episode because I have a couple on our show today, Kyle and Sara Wester, and they are going to be sharing about their own story and how they took what seemed very different from their upbringings and turned that into an opportunity to grow closer to one another. So, without further ado, welcome to the show, Kyle and Sara.
Hello. Thank you, Jordan, for having us on.
Hi, glad to be here.
So awesome. Let me just share a little bit about you guys with our audience. So, Kyle, you're a licensed professional counselor. So are you, Sara, both of you. So, married, both licensed professional counselors, parenting coaches. Kyle, you've been an elementary school counselor for like 7 years and also worked with children then for 20 years, over 20 years. And then you guys have 3 kids of your own, right? You have kids from 8 to 14 years old.
Yeah.
And you started this awesome coaching and counseling business called The Art of Raising Humans 10 years ago. And then you also host a podcast
Yeah.
called Art of Raising Humans. Like, these people are busy and they're homeschooling their kids too. So they got it going on in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And so we just want to dive into your story. Tell us, share us, like, share with us where this passion for helping other parents and starting this business to really coach parents to raise awesome kids came from in your experience.
Well, Jordan, I'd say it came from just a place of gratitude of all the people that have spoken into our lives along the way, some really great experts who have really taught us this art of parenting. Because before we met those people, it wasn't going well. And it wasn't going well in the sense of, we see a lot of couples who have these experiences where when they're first married, like we were married before we had kids for like 6 years, and I was loving it. I was loving just being with Sara because she's awesome. And many times Sarah was like, "You ready to have kids yet? You ready?" No, 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 not yet, not yet, because I just love us. And I was I had this immature fear that maybe some dads who are listening can relate to. I thought, once we have kids, I probably won't see you near as much. I won't have near as much time with my wife. And I'd heard all these horror stories about how, you just don't get to connect anymore and just your time is always taken. And I knew how dedicated of a mom she was going to be. But then eventually, as we finish our master's degrees and as we're like, okay, it's time, then we had kids. And I assumed because we're counselors, I mean, we've had whole classes just on resolving conflict and knowing who you are, and like, oh, we've worked through all our stuff.
And we both were working with kids.
Yeah, so we're like,
we were kind of in the kid world. I worked at an agency. He worked in the school system by that point. And so we were just all counseling kids, all that stuff. So we thought, all right, this is going to go pretty well. We're set up well for this situation.
Yeah, this is going to be super simple. And as we had kids, once again, she was fantastic at it. I was kind of confused about how to do the baby stuff. I mean, I realized, in all honesty, I don't think I'd ever held a baby except for maybe my niece when she was born, and that's it. So like Sara just seemed so good at it, and it was kind of easy for me those first few years to kind of back out and just be kind of like, hey, cool, you got it, awesome, and
Yes.
and it was almost like, because I didn't want to feel incompetent or stupid. I definitely was scared. Like there was moments where she left me home alone with the baby and said, hey, it's really easy, just feed her this bottle while I'm at work. Oh my gosh, those were terrifying moments because I would be holding the baby and she wouldn't be eating, and I'd be having pictures of my baby dying and then her divorcing me, and it was like, this is not what I expected having a kid to be. So it was very difficult to see this going well. But even then, we managed. We were getting through all that and doing well. We're counseling. I figured it would eventually come to me. I'm helping a lot of kids at the school, and but then when the second came along, Jordan, oh man, that then put more responsibility on my shoulders to be much more involved with our oldest. And Man, our oldest, she had all the big feelings, Jordan. Like she felt things big. She expressed it big. And I was starting to do what was done in my home, which was dominate those feelings with my anger. So I
Mm.
started becoming a dad who was quick to anger, quick to yell, quick to threaten punishment. To take these tactics is the only tools I had, and I was going to use those. And Sarah just wasn't going to have it.
No.
She's
No,
like, not under my roof. We're
right.
not
So,
doing it
okay.
this way.
Yes, that's right.
So, you kind of think you're on the same page, and then you have kids, and then you realize all the ways you're not on the same page. Because there were so many things that we had already worked through, we were already in agreement on, but then, man, throwing a kid in there, it really brings things to light that you didn't even know
Yeah.
were going to come up, and just wouldn't even land on your radar until you're in that moment with this child. And my personality versus his personality and our backgrounds and all those things were just colliding. And I remember this moment when she was about 2.5 or 3 maybe, and just hearing him dealing with her big emotions in ways that
Typically at
I
like
was
three
not
in the
okay
morning, at like
with.
3 in the morning when she woke up and wouldn't go back to sleep.
And I remember kind of being worried because I had already talked to him, and I'd worked with little kids for a long time. And so I had shifted some in my beliefs. I was definitely very comfortable and confident in the direction I wanted to go with being peaceful and emotion coaching and all this stuff. And he was not seeing it. And I remember thinking, what are we going to do? Because this isn't going to work for me. And I was kind of
Right.
worried. So
Yeah, and at that point, Jordan, like I was just at a loss for what else are you wanting to do? And I knew we had had conversations along the way where she had said, "Listen, I'm helping kids who've been physically and sexually abused at her agency, and I'm teaching them how not to use fear. I'm teaching them that fear isn't good for those kids. And if our kids don't have that same trauma, why would our kids need that? How is it helpful to us, right? And even to be honest with you, when you looked at scriptures like where God says perfect love drives out all fear because fear has to do with punishment. When you look at the most widely said command in the entire Bible is fear not. Like you start to see that fear isn't something that I believe God wants us to use, but I just thought you have to, like you just have to use it.
You got to
And
scare these kids into
yes,
obedience,
yes,
people. Come
yes.
on.
And really, I was using it because I think I was so scared because I had seen a lot of couples, Jordan, that this had happened to, where they were in love, it was going great, then they have kids, and like Sarah's saying, all this new stuff bubbles to the surface, stuff that you never would have spoken about or talked about, even known was there. But these beautiful little humans bring it to light, and now all of a sudden it's causing a rift in your family. And at that time, even I was counseling some kids going through divorce, and the parents would say, I want you to tell these kids that it's not their fault. And I would say, I agree with you, it's not their fault, but it sure seems like it. And I bet they're going to
Sure.
see it that way too, because it looks like all the arguments you're having are about them and about how you disagree about it. So I saw that same dance starting to happen between us, and I didn't know how to change it.
Mm. What was the turning point? What kind of happened to where you go, okay, we have got to get on the same page here? Because I can relate to what you're saying. I mean, my husband and I, and still to this day, that we have
Yeah.
teenagers and one moving out,
yeah.
and so
Yeah.
there's constantly a new phase of parenting that you
Yes.
haven't experienced yet, and so it's like, how are we going to handle this? They're driving. How are we going to handle this?
Yeah.
They're trying to make a decision about college or flight school or whatever
Yeah.
it is,
Yeah.
and so you continually have to come back and like recalibrate as a couple and be this united team to figure out where you're going next. So this is something we have to continue to do
Yeah.
throughout our journey in parenting. So what was it for you that kind of like, okay, we like did you come to this point where you decided on like a particular parenting style
Yeah. Yeah.
or
Yeah.
adopted like a theory or something?
It was eventually, it was that, but it
Yeah, we
started.
eventually kind of
Yeah.
created a, so to speak, system
Yeah.
that, just like you said, new things come up and we just keep cycling through that same system. Whenever those new things come up, whenever my view and his view kind of collide, we can use that same thing. But we had this moment that sort of started all of that, where I was on one side, he was on one side, and completely different side. And we're thinking, what are we going to do now?
Yeah. And it was
And
really a life-changing moment where I totally unconnected to my kids, I convinced the elementary school to fly me to Florida to just learn from this lady who's good at changing schools. Her name's Dr. Becky Bailey. And Dr. Becky Bailey was going to help me, and these other, professionals learn how to look at behavior a different way, right? And instead of it being something you demand from kids, it's something you teach them. And so she's really big on the brain science from Dr. Dan Siegel and talking about what the brain looks like when we are afraid and what it looks like when we are safe and secure in the relationships around us. And it just looks completely different. Like that's actually when we're open to learning and changing. And so to be honest with you, Jordan, like I'm watching this at the conference thinking I'm going to go help all these kids at the school. And I'm just in tears and I'm just seeing what I'm doing to my children. I'm looking
Oh,
at what fear does, that it actually raises kids to not be self-controlled. It raises them to need me to control them. I'm actually like perpetuating the very thing I'm trying to stop. It also raises them to be very kind of selfish and self-protective instead of caring and loving and giving because they're scared, And so as I saw that, I actually called Sara. I was in Florida. I called her up and I just told Sara, it's going to change. Like from now on, I am not buying into fear being a greater tool than love. I'm actually going to buy into the fact that I think love never fails and that love is stronger than fear. Like fear is what I use when I'm weak. It's fear isn't something I use when I'm strong. I'm making myself look strong, but I'm not actually being strong. And so Sara finally had some hope that I was going to do it differently.
she's
I
like,
think
yes.
yes, I was. I remember that moment when he called. And I was standing in my living room, and actually, our kids were playing at my feet, and it did give me a lot of hope. And really, it was just sort of the catalyst. It was the moment where okay, now there was this. I don't know if maybe trust is the right word, but where it increased our trust in each other and it created this openness so then we could move into doing these other things that helped us and that we still do today.
And that to answer
Mm,
your question, Jordan, that's where I think the catalyst Sara's talking about was all of a sudden I saw that Sara was for me. Before that, I thought Sara was against me, that Sara was trying to change me. Sara thought there was something wrong with me that she needed to change. And I couldn't see that Sara was actually trying to help me do it better. Like she
mm.
believed in my ability to be a better father. And that's all she was asking me to be open to was that idea. But I saw it as her judging me or criticizing me and that kind of stuff. So that was the catalyst to the framework that's kind of the foundational thing that we do is we trust completely that the other is for the other, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm for her, she's for me. Even in those moments where it looks like I'm against you, I actually want to be for you. I just don't know how else to say it right now. So it looks like I'm against you, but I'm for you because it benefits us and our kids if we're for each other. You know?
Yes, 100%. That's why I brought you on the show because listen, we can tell our spouse, I've read this book. I've
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
learned this new thing. There's this new strategy where you don't do timeouts, you do time ins. And,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
spouse is like, this sounds awful.
Yeah.
Like our kids are going to be running the show. This
Yes.
is
Yes.
an imbalance of power.
Totally.
We are
Thought
going
the
to
same thing.
lose.
Yes. Okay. Well,
Right.
I thought it was a lack of control. I thought it was weak. I thought it was like, oh, you want me to be you, Sara? Well, I'm not you. And that's the reason why we got married is because you're going to be good cop. I'll be bad cop. That's what we have to do.
Yes.
That's how this thing works out.
Yes. So you got this training
Yeah.
and the light bulb comes on and you're kind of like, "Whoa, I'm seeing this from a totally different perspective." You come back home. What did you guys kind of start doing behavior-wise to change the way that you were parenting from this place of fear or discipline and consequences to
Yeah.
this loving kind of positive discipline
Yeah.
technique?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, we first of all decided upon, hey, we need to figure out really what are the strengths and weaknesses that we bring into this thing. Instead of me judging you as like weak and soft and me as strong and like that, I don't actually think that's how God's created us. So I actually think, Sara, when I look at you, your kindness is a strength. Like the fact that you don't get mad quickly is good. That isn't bad, right?
Yes.
And then Sara was able to say, you know what I love about you? And she was able to point out the obviously the flip of the coin to my weaknesses, which was my passion and that I can definitely be intense, and that I can lead, and I can be very assertive, right? But then Sarah was like, but when you slip over into the fear stuff, you turn aggressive, and all those kind of things, right? So we had this really good conversation that happened over a span of several days and weeks, months, of just us like, what I see in you that I really admire is this. And she's like, I really admire that about you. And like, we started seeing it as we're coming as, not perfect people. It's not our goal. We have these imperfections in us that I think God is going to use to actually help form our kids into healthier human beings.
And I think so good. So you didn't go for the practical, like, okay, now that I'm back home, we're not doing timeouts, we're doing time ins. You were like, whoa, let's step back, let's pull back. Let's kind of look at our temperament, our personalities, our strengths and weaknesses. Let's like sit in that for a while and let that kind of marinate, or let us steep ourselves in who we were created to be, our weaknesses and our strengths, and then form an appreciation for each other's strengths and weaknesses, accept those gifts, and then honor those and see that as complementarity. I love that word, because it's like your gifts complement each other as one, right?
Yeah, because if you stay the other way, you stay in this place of judgment and you're looking for what's going wrong. And you really have to shift to this position of being able to reframe things and look at how you can grow together. And we do this still now, but where his strengths, I will rely on and sort of tap him into a situation. You're like, hey, it's your turn because you're really good at this. Or vice versa. He'll tap me in. It's like, hey, you take care of this because you're really good at that part. And so we use that to help our family as a whole. And so we definitely had to step back, and we knew each other's personality really well inside of marriage or even working or friendship, but to look at each other as a parent and what they're bringing to the table. And we can always grow. I hope I grow in certain areas and he grows in areas too. But this starting point of, okay, this is what we have and we're constantly going to be working and growing, but let's see how we can team up together. And we needed that foundation to trust and to go forward. And we needed to also, I'd say the next thing I'd like to jump into is just, we also had to revisit where the paradigm we were parenting from. You have these autopilot things that happen in your head, and we needed to be aware of those, because like the good cop, bad thing didn't happen in my home. So when he sometimes will feel like I'm saying, oh, it's your turn to be bad cop, or he'll come in as bad cop, that's something that's autopilot for him, but it's not for me. But it helped me so much to realize, oh, you think when there's a conflict, I'm asking you to come in as the big bad guy and, make the kids do what I'm asking. Yeah. And so that really helped me, just even that one little thing. But there's all those conversations about like, what happened in these moments in your childhood? Yeah. Where are you kind of acting out of?
And we'd never had those conversations, and that's what I hope all your listeners hear is we really started buying into in that kind of second step that Sarah's talking about, that our kids are tools that God is using to transform us into the people we've actually prayed to become. Like without all their idiosyncrasies, without all of the ways in which conflict arises because of them, that he's actually shaping and forming us into better human beings because of that, not in spite of it, So I think that was a big part of it, was like, oh, we need to start seeing these conflicts not as moments to push away from each other like we had been doing, because fear would say that. Fear would say, push them away, go put them in timeout, or go do fear would say that. Say like, no, these are times to draw closer. So during these conflicts, we agreed we want conflict to be an opportunity for intimacy, an opportunity to understand each other. I mean, Jordan, I told you we were just on vacation in California this past week, and there were several times where I was stressed and overwhelmed and tired, and I blew up at the kids. And instead of beating myself up about that, man, the car rides we had, because we were driving a lot through all these national parks, man, we had some of the best, deepest conversations with the kids, where I just said, hey, kids, what did you think about that moment? Well, what did you think about what just happened back there? Like, here's what was going on in my head. Can you tell me what's going on in yours? And actually, I made the mistake of having the Airbnb too far away from Yosemite, but it ended up not being a mistake, because those car rides went by so fast. And Sarah and I would get back and be like, dang, that was like one of the best conversations we've had. And it was all because I was imperfect. It was all because I acted in a way I didn't want to. But then I was able to go back and without any shame, just with humility of just say, man, what can we learn about ourselves through this thing, you know? And so I think going back to when we first started, those were conversations we were not having because I was afraid of what she'd say to me. You know, that she'd say, I don't like how you're doing this or doing this. But once I really be like, Sara is for me. Like she wants this thing to work. She's not like undermining me and wanting this all to suck for us. So once I believed that, then I could have daily conversations with her where she could give me, and then she'd say, what would you suggest I could have done differently? And then I could give her insight. And it was like, oh God, this is so cool that we're not exactly the same. It's so cool that we see these moments differently, but we have the same focus. And Jordan, this is important. We had to believe, once again, that fear is not helpful. Like I do not want to have that in our home. So anytime I bring it, if I bring the fear, it's not helpful. Like even if I quote unquote got what I wanted or got the outcome, it's inevitably going to hurt us. It doesn't help us grow into brave, courageous, responsible, caring people. It just causes us to fight for ourselves. Yeah. Yeah. So having that as a belief really helped those conversations, you know? So in going back, man, there was so much insight that Sara helped me see and I helped her see in ways we were parented that were like, you know, I love this about my parents. I love this about your parents, but I would like not to do this. Yeah. And I'd share, Sara would say the same thing back.
Yeah, we were able to have these conversations where maybe like for example, in his family, yelling was common and they did a lot of yelling. In my family, we didn't, but the flip side of that is we also kind of would sweep things under the rug maybe, or we couldn't share certain feelings or, you know, so it's sort of like, okay, I love the peace that was in my home, but I want to bring this too.
Yeah.
And he was like, okay, I love that we could talk, but maybe we don't need to yell.
That's right. Yes.
You know, so we were able to come and say, okay, let's set this part aside from my childhood. Let's take this with us. And then the next thing was, what do we want to add? What are we going to bring into our family? And so we started having those kind of conversations to create the home environment and the, you know, how do we want to nurture? How do we want to discipline? How do we want to do all these things as a family?
Yeah. So going back to that question you asked, that's where we started making those decisions was on that third step was like, which experts do we align with this idea? We need to start. Okay. So once then I got to connect with Dr. Laura Markham, who wrote Peaceful Parent, Happy Kids. I got to journey with her for 6 months and Sara was just loving that because I'm just like, for 6 months, I'm meeting with Dr. And I tell you what, Jordan, every time we had a disagreement back then, I could get Dr. Markham on the phone and I could actually talk to her and I'd be like, you know what, let's see what Dr. Markham would say. Every time she would agree with Sara, like every time it's like, and so I'd be like, oh, I do have so much growth. I do have so much growth here. But the way Markham said it, because once again, I felt like she was for me. I was like, this is interesting. When Markham says the same thing that Sara's saying, I'm much more receptive and open. Oh, I think because I'm not scared that Markham thinks I'm a bad husband, whereas I'm scared that my wife does. So once again, that's why fear doesn't help me. Is I'm not receptive to the love and the ideas my wife has because I'm afraid she's saying I'm failing, that I'm becoming my dad or something like that. And I had to like let go of that so then I could be more open-handed and receptive to her feedback that she had.
Yes. So I hear you saying, you know, at the beginning, it was like, I'm fearful. I don't quite know what I'm doing in this baby parenting thing. You know, I don't want to really weigh in because I don't want to look like an idiot. It's all this fear of judgment, right? And then there's a paradigm shift where it's like, wait, this woman is for me. Like we are on the same team. And if she's for me, then the things she's suggesting, I can take as, you know, constructive feedback on how I can make a more peaceful home and not use fear in our parenting. And I love the openness and just the candor about like, when it comes from someone else, it's not your spouse. Like everybody wonders, why is that? Why is it so much different when I've been telling you the same thing for 10 years, but then Johnny down the block brings it up and you're like, that's a great idea. But you're so right, Kyle. Like it's the fear thing.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and I'll give you an example of where this was kind of like the moment where I'm like, this is phenomenal. I love it. Where I would come home, there was a few weeks where I would come home from work. It'd be late at night. Back then I was working 2 jobs and I would come home late at night and Sara would already be home with the kids. And I would hear Abby, our youngest, who's now 14, she was like yelling at Sara just in her face.
She was in that really big emotion preschool toddler phase. And so all the feelings were super big. And after a day of daycare and time to get, time for bed, she's exhausted, she's spent. And so we'd see a lot of big emotions.
And so I would come home, hear her yell, and the first
Which
five,
is what he saw. As soon as he walks in the door,
as soon as I walk in, I hear that, and I think, this would not happen in my home. This is not happening in my. So I come in there, and then I'm embarrassed to say this, Jordan, but I would tell Sarah just to leave the room. I said, get out of the room, like, you let me take it, because I thought, okay, look, your little nice thing ain't working. So now I've got to come in.
All that empathy.
Yeah, I got to come in. I got to let Abby know that I can get bigger and stronger than her, right? So then I would yell at her, and I'd basically like intimidate her enough to stop being so loud. And then I remember one night that happened, and I came out I was so mad at Sarah. I was so mad at Sarah for her making me be the bad cop. Like, I didn't want to do that. I never wanted to have that relationship with my kids. It's like, because you refuse to be tough, I've got to be the tough one. So I came in the living room, and Sarah's on the couch, and we at this point had gotten into this routine of having these nightly parenting conversations, of just kind of reevaluating what's working, what isn't. Are we staying aligned with our values about how we want love to be stronger than fear and so forth? And so I say to her, I said, you know what really upsets me is how you're so passive that you make me become aggressive. And then she looked at me and said, that's funny, because I feel like I have to be passive because I know how aggressive you're going to be.
It's that teeter-totter effect.
Yeah.
We're trying to reach that equilibrium.
Yeah. And so then I was like, how did you turn that on me? Like, I was totally the right one here. You're the wrong one. So I sat there, I calmed down a minute and just said, then what do you suggest we do? And she said, I would suggest we do what we've been reading and what we've been learning. And I said, what's that? She said, why don't we try being assertive? Like, we don't have to be passive. We don't have to be aggressive. Let's be assertive. I said, what does that mean? And she said, when you come home, if you hear Abby yelling at me, just come in and ask if I need your help. If I say no, then walk away. And I said, then what do you want me to do? Sit on the couch. Maybe pray for me. Maybe think some positive thoughts about me. Because she's like, I'm doing my best. And I've got to learn how to do this with Abby. And Abby's got to be confident I can do it with her too. And so, man, it was interesting, Jordan. When I sat on that couch, I was expecting it all just to blow up in Sarah's face, but I was doing my best to like try to like pray for her. And then I heard Abby within a few minutes crying and then hugging her mom and then calming down. And then I was like, dang, that was actually kind of effective. So then the next night I walked in, do you need my help? She's like, no. I sit on the couch. I'm like, oh, I can't wait to learn. I want to hear what Sarah's doing. So then I was like, wow, that's interesting. But then there were nights where I came home and she was kind of tired too. And she'd say, yeah, could you help me? And then I found I didn't come in all tough and big and strong. Instead, I was like, oh, I'm going to try to do that thing Sarah was doing last time. I'm seriously going to empathize and listen to, and I was like, oh, this feels better. I actually like how this feels rather than me screaming at her and trying to intimidate a 4-year-old little girl. Right. And so I just like, oh, so that was a big lesson on like, man, if we worked together, man, it would be so beautiful and so powerful, because the word we use a lot in our home is we co-create together. We would co-create the family we want. And that's probably the last step, that as we started to say, what do we want this to look like? What kind of discipline do we want to do? Now let's invite the kids into this, because it's their family too. I want to invite them into co-creating the family they want to have. And then when they know they have that kind of power, Jordan, it helps them feel like anything in the family, we can grow and change. Like, nobody's stuck in place. Dad's open to my feedback. And if dad's open, then I'm going to be open to his feedback, you know? And so it makes it to where the follow-up conversations after things go sideways, the kids are open to them. The kids want to have those talks. And so that's what happened in the car ride from Yosemite, was some really open-handed, open-hearted moments where we co-created a different outcome to what had just occurred that day.
I love it. I'm listening and just thinking of the difference in the culture of your family, from operating from that place of fear-based parenting to love-based parenting. And it reminds me of what we talk about all the time at Families of Character, is just that, we come with all these differences and personalities and temperaments and upbringings, but if we can unite ourselves around a common goal or a common theme, a mission for our family where, love never fails and fear isn't a part of our family, then it breaks down all that division. It breaks down all of the differences and helps us come together in unity. Right. And so the other thing that is just so beautiful about what you're talking about is this idea of really employing humility
Yeah.
as husband and wife, right?
Mhm.
Hey, can I offer you some feedback?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
I need some right now.
Yeah.
Great. I'd love to offer you some feedback. Yes, please help me,
Yeah.
and then demonstrating this in front of your children and constantly being like, oh man, I did that thing again. I blew
Yeah.
up back there at Yosemite,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
what was happening for you guys, right?
And what was so cool,
Yeah.
Jordan, as you're saying that, I'm thinking of a moment that really touched me was on our drive back from Disneyland. I'd gotten upset at Disneyland, and there was a little bit where I was hanging back from the family, and part of me was hanging back because I felt like maybe the four of them are better off without me around because I get mad and I lose my cool and I act like a jerk, and I don't want that. And so, in telling the kids that of what was going on in my mind, why I was hanging back and not necessarily always walking with them as a family because I was kind of dealing with that internal stuff, is my 12-year-old son said, Dad, what would have helped you in those moments? Like, what would have helped you? And I said, Brennan, you know what would have helped me is if someone would have told me they love me just as I am and love all the parts of me, my weaknesses, my strengths. Because in that moment, I didn't love me just as I am. I wanted to be somebody else, and I was kind of sick of myself. And so it was really cool. Where a couple of days later, I was upset about something, and my daughter Abby comes over, puts her arm around me, and says, "Dad, I love all of you." And it was so cool. And I was like,
Yes.
that's exactly what I was so cool that she remembered that and did it because it was exactly, I never had articulated that to the kids, but I thought it was such a cool moment to articulate because I bet they need that too. And that's actually at
Yes.
the core. Like when we're saying love never fails, we're not talking about like, oh, you're just never mad. You're like, to me, love is strong. It is powerful. And at the core of our family is one of my favorite quotes from an author I love named Brennan Manning. And it's that God loves you just as you are and not as you should be, because none of us are as we should be. And that was a piece. Sarah made that a Father's Day gift one year, got that put on a piece of wood, and we put it up in our house. And I wanted the kids to see that and kind of get that in their heart, because that's at the core of what peaceful parenting is. That's at the core of what conscious discipline is, and these other types of approach that they're really grabbing a hold of this idea that it's through accepting you just as you are. That love is what empowers us to have the courage to change and to
Mm.
actually do it better.
So good. So good. I'm letting this just settle in for myself as I hear you. And it's just so beautiful. One of the things I love about the two of you, and I'm new to your podcast, I'm kind of new to your community, but I love just the vulnerability and the visuals that you're giving us. Like, yeah, I pout sometimes. I did this
Yeah.
myself on
Oh, I totally
vacation
was
this
pouting. I was
summer,
totally pouting.
right?
Yes.
But just to be able to give your kids like the words,
Yeah.
obviously you've said what would have helped you in this
Yeah.
situation,
Yeah.
son,
Yeah. Yeah.
because he was able to say, Dad, what would have helped you in that
Yeah.
situation? So
Yeah.
knowing that, man, our kids are sponges.
Yeah.
They are constantly learning from us, and we're giving them language we want them to use on themselves. So it's
Yeah.
important that we're using language that will help them in the future, right? So for
Yeah.
them to be able to just say, Dad, what could we have done different so that you didn't hang back and be feeling ashamed of yourself back
Yeah.
there?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and for you to have that, like, where you're not trying to be tough and be like, you know what, never mind, I got this. And
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
just me being a jerk. But
It's
like,
true.
being vulnerable and saying, I
Yeah.
just want you to tell me that you love every part of me, like
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
even in my failings and my mess ups and everything, because
Yeah.
to me that's a huge part of love is
Yeah.
just repairing those ruptures, right? Is just
Yes.
being willing to call yourself out and go, I am not perfect, none of us are, like let's
Yeah.
laugh about it later,
Yes.
and embrace it.
Yeah. Well, and even that's not the goal. It'd be a gross goal. If Sarah's my goal was to be perfect parents, I actually don't think that's helpful to your kids, because your kids actually want to know you're imperfect because it allows them to be imperfect. So the more you're honest about that, the more it frees them to then be able to be receptive and open to growing and changing.
Totally. Sarah, did you have a thought you wanted to share?
No, I love all of that. I love that we can be imperfect humans so our children can be imperfect humans. And when we come around each other, it's not to take responsibility for the other. Like he still owned his responsibility and how he acted, but then we can have this conversation about what's going on internally for us and how we can come around each other in those moments, because we ask our children when they're upset, what would help you?
Mm-hmm.
I can see
Mm-hmm.
you're really mad or sad or whatever it might be. What can help you? And it's not to give them whatever they want, but it's like, how can I come alongside you? How can I help you hold this big feeling that you're feeling?
Yeah.
And
to know you're not alone in it.
and to
Yeah.
just to not be go to your room until that feeling is gone or buried deep enough. But it's like, how can we sit together in this? Because we are a family. We can help each other. We can journey together. We're not alone. And so I love the power of those conversations and the modeling as we're imperfectly modeling it, but modeling it, how to do this, how to come together and care for each other in our imperfections. And that's what frees us. It's that love that frees us to grow. It's that love that frees us to not live in the shame of our imperfections.
Well, and going back to one last thing I'll say, Jordan, about that, you were talking about how our son had that ability to voice these things, is something that really impacted me too, that Dr. Becky Bailey taught back at that first conference, was how little kids up to about 7 or 8, they don't have a little voice in their head, that they don't have the ability to like talk to themselves in their own mind like we do. But she says when that comes online, that voice is going to sound like ours. Mm-hmm. And that's the gift that we give our kids, is that voice. And it's really the voice that's in our heads as parents. When stuff hits the fan, the things we say are the voices in our head that typically came from our own parents. So she talks about being intentional about the voice you're going to give them. And all these moments where you use fear or intimidation or shame, you're actually just giving them this lifelong voice in their head to speak to them in that way. And that's where I was like, man, love is so powerful, because if you can actually give them a different voice, an encouraging one, a hopeful one, then they're not constantly battling that voice in every situation.
Yes. So good. I love that from 0 to 7, it's like you're kind of programming them and their
that internal dialogue. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yes. It's so important. And I wonder too, I'm thinking out loud about this, but like how the age of reason comes online at 7, right? So it's like they've stacked up all of these words that we've given them, and then their brain is developing to a certain point, and then it's all of a sudden like they're online and like, whoa, we can have conversations.
And one thing I would add to that too is, as believers, I really believe too that a lot of times people have a hard time hearing God's voice because it sounds so different than the ones they heard growing up, right? Like him whispering to them, "I love you just as you are." It sounds like a lie. And like, no, it's actually true. It's not a lie, right? And so that to me was so important to us as people of faith, is I wanted my kids, when they heard God say, "Will you follow me?" that they'll say, "Yeah." Because your voice sounds just like my parents. It sounds just like it's an easy transition. Instead of it going, "Follow you where? Where are we going? Is it going to be scary?" Instead, they trust that the follow me is like, "Oh yeah, that's what my parents." Like the way we see discipline, the root word of that is disciple, right? And we see all discipline as something we're doing with you, not to you. We're hand in hand doing the discipline with you, because we're wanting to be self-disciplined people. We want to give you the ability to be self-disciplined too. And so hand in hand, we're creating how to be more disciplined in these moments. And I just think that's eventually going to make it easier for them to transition into following somebody else that's even more loving.
So true. So true. I love this. So I want to get back to like the practical. Okay. You and Sarah had this moment. You're like, we need to get to know each other and like figure out where we came from and appreciate each other's strengths. Now, do you have a resource for parents to be able to have this conversation? And I just want to emphasize that you guys did this after you had kids and started parenting. It wasn't like you got married and you went, let's learn about each other and do this course. And right. So it's never too late. You can have kids in high school and go, we need to come back to the table and like rewind 20 years and figure out where we came from. So do you have a resource for us?
Yeah. And what we use, I'd say different things are going to come up in different stages. So even though we did it when they were young, we have to revisit this all the time, because the expectations on now we have teenagers. So my expectations on what that looks like to parent a teenager, to be a teenager in a home, are going to be different than his. So it is something that we come back around to. And so we kind of have put together a little like workbook that you can use, and questions we found helpful, thoughts and things that we've worked through together that help bring light to things so we can make decisions and create something together going forward.
Yeah, so we'll include that, give that to you for the show notes. And we hope what it does inspire some parents to sit down and just be able to have these conversations, these open-handed, trusting conversations about each other, to where these conflicts can create more understanding and more intimacy with them. And to be honest with you, it's what their kids want. Like their kids, I was a kid who wished my parents would have done this. And if someone would have come along with this tool, it would have been an amazing answer to prayer, that my parents are actually sitting down and believing that they are for each other, and that they're going to want to not just dictate things to us, but to actually understand each other and then invite us into that process of like co-creating this family. That would be amazing. So that tool would be great. And then also I want to, any parents who are listening to this too and say, hey man, I would really like some coaching in some of those areas, they can always reach out to me, Jordan, at Kyle@artofraisinghumans.com, and they can reach out and we can set up a Zoom meeting to just see if they're a good fit for the coaching program.
I totally recommend Kyle's coaching program. I've already referred a few couples from our Thriving Family Accelerator. We have intimate conversations about what's happening in our homes and our marriages and how connected we are, or how we're on different pages. And I've already sent you a couple people. So highly recommend what you're doing, Kyle, because you do have this counseling and coaching practice where you are walking with parents, getting in the trenches with them, and then giving them some very practical tools to kind of align themselves as a team, as a united parenting team, to move forward in love with their kids. So this is so good.
Yeah.
So good. And
yeah,
go ahead.
I was just going to say also, we have the podcast, which you've mentioned, and we'd love people to join us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Well, what we're doing there is constantly doing reels that kind of expand the conversation that we've had on the podcast.
Check them out on social media and artofraisinghumans.com. And I'm just going to put this out there. I'm going to invite you back, because
nice.
There's so much more we can talk about.
Yes,
and I really want to bookmark this idea of like positive discipline, and this concept coming from a male therapist and father and married man to other men, because I just think this is something that's kind of been hidden under a bushel basket, which it's not, shouldn't be, right? And it's this light to the world, to our spouse, to our kids. And so let's just do that in the future.
That'd be awesome, Jordan. We'd love that.
So good. Well, Kyle and Sara, thank you for being on the show. Thank you for sharing how, conflict in our marriage, conflict in our family can be used as opportunity for intimacy, how love never fails. And, fear is just what I use when I'm feeling weak.
Yes.
So embracing this idea of love as a family, and that fear has no place here, and that our belief in God and what we were created to do, and how we are created to co-create this family and this amazing culture of teamwork is just where it's all at. So thank you for being on the show. And guys, check out the show notes for all the links to Kyle and Sara and the Art of Raising Humans. Thanks,
you,
guys.
Thank you for having us.
Yes.
That was awesome, Jordan.
So good. You guys are so awesome. Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome. And